Ladies and gentlemen, this is the 27th episode of Concerned Dabs Podcast. I'm your host, Katie M. Kane. With me is my co-host, Will Terps.
Yo.
Tonight's guest, ladies and gentlemen, we have Paul Swift from Swift Solutions to talk about the vape crisis. Yeah, man, what's up, dude? So
hey guys,
we had Paul on the lab testing episode earlier this year, so we made it past the 6-month mark, and he hit me up a couple weeks ago saying, "Hey, man, I got some cool sciencey stuff to say about that. If you want to do an episode on," I was like, "Hell yeah, bro! Hell yeah!" It just I almost every single time I give someone a Lyft ride at work, that comes up in conversation because it's like, I don't know. I just like to talk about weed no matter what, even just in the regular world, not just the podcast. And they would ask about the vape stuff and, "Oh, is that stuff safe?" I keep hearing, and I try to explain it in my term, but have the science acumen that Paul Swift does. So I'm glad that he can come on here and explain everything in detail. Not just because he knows about it, but he works in a lab that tests mad carts on the Oregon rec market. So good to be on the show.
appreciate you guys having back on. Just the news that's coming out.
Yeah.
The vape, and you do the vape.
Yeah.
Felt strong about it, so I read and hope you can. Of happening quickly and in some places. Example here in Oregon, the courts sit down to 6 stay everybody to and that held about 3 or 4 permission because that was a law to the next level. Everybody was up on parts for Jewel, cigarette products.
Yeah.
So it's easy.
That's why. It just seems like this distraction for the news. Like sick, and the whole like fuck. People die from smoke every year. You know what I mean? Like,
and cigarettes.
Yeah, you know, and that's on the news.
Everything I should say is that throughout all stuff, and I about 12 because I wanted to be official and everything. Versus people that you might know those sick, how the actual number seem like everything, all the news people are just throwing whatever. But just to put some numbers to real quick. One of the biggest stuff done in Wisconsin. It was this report was published in the New Journal of
Just said he had to change the server. He couldn't hear. I could just fine. So
awesome. Everything good. I think it was 12 or 14 people that were the main focus of the article. There overall between those 2 states in 6 months, there was about 52 cases that were mentionable for acute respiratory distress.
And they
notified to the hospital as the tobacco vapors, and it said, I think I have the exact numbers here, 17% were nicotine only, and about 44% smoked both, and they smoked
Can you say those numbers one more time?
Yeah,
it keeps lagging when Will jumps in and jumps out. So jump in, Will. Jump.
Jump.
Yeah.
I just jumped. I'm jumping in now.
Okay,
My shit
cool.
just crashed on me.
Okay, it's cool.
I had trouble.
All right.
It's all good.
Can you say the numbers one more
just-
time, Paul?
Just real quick. So, of those two states, Illinois and Wisconsin, where the heaviest study has been done, 52 people, 44% of those people smoked both tobacco and cannabis products. And then you had about 17 were nicotine only. So unfortunately, it kind of lends to the idea that cannabis products were probably a larger contributor. And then about 40% of those people smoked only cannabis products. There was one notable product, and I'll just put it out there in case anybody's listening out in those area codes, but the dank vape, quote unquote, label was one in particular to stay away from. It seemed like a lot of the patients, I think 14 of those patients had used that product.
Gape? D-A-P-E?
Dank vape.
Dank
D-A-N-K.
vape.
Yeah.
Watch
so
out for dank vapes.
And
whiskey. God damn it.
In
Watch
Wisconsin
out.
and Illinois. And so if you extrapolate out, that was about 6 months. You had about 50 people. I think if you do the math, that's about 100 people for the two states in a year. You got 50 states, maybe around, we're talking about affecting 2,500 people in the United States, potentially.
Yeah.
It doesn't really account for population and stuff, but just to put those numbers out there, we're talking about across the United States within a year, projecting about 2,500 cases of these severe respiratory illnesses. So far less than the hundreds of thousands that are going to die in the same year from tobacco, cigarettes.
Yeah,
so
man.
I think that's the point that we all want to make clear to everybody, is that it's not quite the epidemic
that it's portrayed to be in the media, man.
Exactly. So I do feel a little bit liberated in finding these facts, because I think that was kind of the concept, what we all thought. One other thing I'll point out is that of those 52 patients, 25 of them had a history of asthma or some type of.
That's like half of them, bro.
That's significant to me. It seems like these people all kind of had somewhat of a predisposition to respiratory ailments. I can't say, I'm not a medical doctor, but that seemed to be a significant statistic to me of those people. I'm not going to downplay the ailments that they seem to portray, because some of them were significant. I think about 40% of them ended up having to have assisted breathing in some fashion, whether it was oxygen assistance or positive respiratory assistance.
Damn.
I think about 30% of those 52 people were put into the intensive care unit, and they seem to all.
What about age? Is there any data on how old they were?
In their like 15 to 45 range, so younger people.
Wow. Damn, that's crazy.
None of them had. And the other thing I'll point out too is none of them had predisposition to immunodeficiency. None of them seemed to have any other bacterial or viral respiratory problems at all, which is what I thought initially, is maybe these people were already compromised medically, but it doesn't seem to be the case. It seems to kind of just be like semi-normal people kind of walking in off the streets and having these symptoms, which is a little probably bit more why it's scary for these people, because otherwise these are pretty healthy individuals. But the condition that they're exhibiting is not an unknown condition. They liken it to something called lipoid pneumonia, which, pneumonia is something we're all familiar with, and lipoid just means that you basically kind of breathe in oil-like products, which is basically kind of what we're assuming happens with black market vaporizers and e-cigarettes, is that people are actually putting in oils and cutting agents to try to cut what they're smoking, and they're developing this condition that's normally seen like in chefs that work in heavy oil kitchens. Or people that work in the automotive industry.
Lipoid, is it like related to lipid like lipids.
Exactly.
That's where the word is derived from. Okay, cool.
Yep.
Yeah, what the fuck were they called? Serious Extracts. Their sales guy when I was at Human Collective. He was trying to like talk about the purity of their shatter because it would be like 90% on the lab sometimes. I'm like, how the fuck do you get, there's still color in there. I didn't understand. It seemed like a little inflated.
That's
But
a little high for sure.
he was talking about shatter being safer than wax because wax has lipids in it. And he was saying that your lungs don't really have a system to pull those oily like molecules and shit out. Like it's like anything else, particulates, your mucus system usually grabs it up and gets it out. But he said it doesn't. Your mucus system doesn't work as well on lipids, and so that I remember him saying that to me in like 2014, 2015, something like that. So that does make sense, man.
Yeah, it's and yeah, I totally concede that point. I wasn't really thinking about it in terms of like the natural waxes and stuff because I know I'm a big fan of dabbing and things, but yeah, I mean the more typical oils people are using now are the ones that we should be more concerned about are like your typical cutting agents, ethylene glycol, propylene glycol, glycerin. Those are typical ones, more familiar, but people are also starting to use, at least in our neck of the woods, other classes of compounds. One popular one is a true terpenes product called flavorless terpenes. And it's basically a squalene molecule. It's a terpene, a terpenoid compound. Again, that word squalene, but it's basically a long chain molecule that has no perceivable flavor or scent, but it decreases the viscosity of the concentrate and allows them to cut it. And it's a very expensive additive, and it makes people a lot of money because they add it in high concentrations to their distillate.
Yeah.
That's a really bad one that we don't know what the effects are. I have a paper about lipoid pneumonia being caused by inhalation of squalene, so it seems to be the same kind of thing. Mineral oil, vitamin E, these are also things that we're seeing in products that should be avoided at all costs.
Yeah, I remember reading an article. There was some sort of, it was on IG. Some company, it was called Honey or something. And it was a cutting agent, and it was same principle to get it to the right viscosity for a cartridge. And the company was just selling that shit only, no carts.
That was the vitamin E guys. Yeah, I hope they get
arrested. Yeah.
There was a video I saw. My friend posted it probably like a week and a half ago or so. It was some guy dabbing I think he was dabbing like a fake diamond. I don't know, probably ordered off the internet or something, with a silicone carb cap, no less. But as he was dabbing it, you see it melt, and it's like it's not really melting. It's kind of like flaming up a bit in the banger, so you're kind of wondering like, what the fuck is that? And then he literally like mid dab, he pulls away. It bounces. Yeah, exactly. And he pulls away from the dab, and he's got like white like residue all over his mouth and like all over the rig and shit. And he just goes like, ugh. It's like, Jesus, like I don't know what that exactly. What caused that exactly, but Jesus, regardless, there's so many people willing to buy whatever off the internet, for smokable products, and just like it's shit.
Yeah. And the cutting, I remember it was before shit went wreck. I think it was Golden Extracts. They had on their packaging the test result was for the oil, right? And so it's like 65% or whatever THC, but it's like after the fact they were using a cutting agent, and so what you were actually getting as far as proportion and percentage, it was way less than 60% THC in the fucking cartridge. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So,
jeez.
That was a long time ago. Like, and that was just on getting gypped on how much oil you're getting, but now it's like an actual safety issue, which I think is dope. But
it's unfortunate. we've started testing specifically for these adulterants in a separate test.
Yeah, man. So what kind of stuff have you been finding in the lab results out there in Oregon, man, as
we've been
far as bad shit? What's going to make something fail? You know what I mean?
Well, the unfortunate thing is that none of these things we're talking about will make a product fail because
Oh, fuck,
there's no
man.
regulation, good or bad, for them. So we're
Damn.
looking for them because we're trying to stay ahead of the curve, and hopefully the state might adopt more stringent laws to the addition of those adulterants. But for right now, we're just identifying them for our own records, really.
That's dope.
We're people that want to verify what they're smoking, and we accept samples through the mail and stuff like that. Even CBD products a lot more heavily these days.
That's tight, man.
But
That's super
yeah,
tight. How much does it cost? Like, say I went and bought 10 packages of gummies down here in AZ. If I sent one of them to you, how much would it cost to get it?
We'd hook you up with the deal, but the going rate for a pesticide advisory is $200.
Okay.
And that gets you, and that would include the adulterants. So right now we don't have a test for adulterants, but about $200 would test you for the pesticides and some of the adulterants we mentioned, the glycols and solvents. Those we run on a solvents test, which I guess is $100. So $100 for the solvents. Some of the other adulterants like squalene we run on a terpene analysis, and we would probably have to just include that in with it. But I mean, to answer your question, $100 is about what we would charge. But
that's dope.
Yeah, it's more if you want.
Like, my bad. Okay, so my homie, my neighbor owns the store at our apartments, and one time he took me to the distributor store where they got like shit tons of tobacco and like little rigs from China, and the stem pieces, like everything, dude. But they had their CBD section was fucking huge, dude. Like I couldn't believe it. I was like, damn. And so many different companies. Yeah, dude, so many different packages. Like I was like, fuck. I wouldn't even know.
I bet you
where to start.
half of them, maybe a third of them don't have any CBD.
Yeah.
I would say, of the remaining 60%, about 10% probably have the level that they claim on the package.
Yeah, it didn't seem like it was regulated. It's not regulated very well at all, and I didn't.
No,
I grabbed one to look for any lab test that looked similar to Oregon's labeling.
There's no requirement testing, but Oregon's starting to change that, but slowly. But it's the same. Some people test.
Stay on here, Will. God damn it, stay on here.
Some people.
Hey, not my fault. My shit keeps cutting out.
All right, I can hear you. My bad. Go ahead, Paul. Like, don't lose your chain of thought, man.
No, not at all. It's without the regulation, the variability. I think putting a plug out for Netflix's show Rotted.
Yeah.
But, if you watch the episode on cannabis, it's very informative. But they're right. Making edibles repeatable and stuff is very. It seems difficult for people.
Fuck yeah, dude. It's like you have to grow all the weed yourself, and it has to be the same fucking monocrop, and you have to run all the oil yourself and distill it the same fucking way every single time. Like, it's impossible, dude. Like, it's
definitely
hard.
Difficult, and we fail a lot of edibles because they have too much variability sample to sample. So that's something that does happen.
Oh damn! So like, what's the requirement? Does it have to be within 10% of the last batch or something like that?
It has to be a 15% relative percent difference between the two samples, the primary and duplicate sample. So if one has 100, the other one has to be between 115 and 85.
Fuck.
Like, give or take, that's a rough estimate, but yeah, something like that.
How often do you guys fail? How often do you guys fail somebody?
Probably about 20 to 25% of the time.
Damn.
So a lot more
That'd be a
people
bummer.
are getting out of the game because they don't have the consistency. But I'll also throw it out there too that testing for edible content is much more difficult than just testing for flower or concentrate. So our job's much more difficult, and it's, to be honest, without all the experience that we've gained over the years, it was even hard for us to do edibles a couple of years ago. I feel pretty solid about our edible game now, but they require, sometimes weeks or months of development of developing a standard operating procedure for extracting it so that you get reliable results, because it's very possible too that they're making totally good edibles and the lab's just screwing it up.
Yeah. Well, like that's why companies are starting to use distillate now too, is because you can get it to basically 90% and then fucking put in whatever your dosage is for each piece. And
it seems much easier to dose out isolate or distillate.
Yeah.
But I will say this for the CBD products in particular, I'm of the school of thought that the full spectrum extracts of the hemp plant have exponentially more medical benefit immediately to the patient than CBD gained through isolate. And it's unfortunate, and I hate to say that as a scientist because, potato, it shouldn't matter. But it does seem that we're unable to really quantify the medical benefits seen by a full spectrum oil or like a Rick Simpson oil or something that's more inclusive of all of the medical components of the plant and not just that isolated form.
Yeah, man, it's got everything in there. Like that's my cousin Trina. She was a chemist, man, and I called her to ask questions one time, and that's what she told me. Like when I worked in Seattle, I quit doing dabs because my heart started hurting. You know what I mean? And it just, I swear to God, it was the pesticides. And that's before I learned that they would be concentrated in the oil just like the THC would. It was before I learned all that. But when I called her to ask her, why could my heart be hurting from fucking doing this shit? And she just said, I don't know about that. She goes, I would just be worried about stuff that helps you as far as medicine and the flowers not making it into the oil. She's like, that's what I would worry about. You might not be getting all of your medicine if you just do the dabs, even though it's concentrated. And I was like, God damn.
Yeah, you know? I mean, I have a lot of family. I have a lot of friends that I send a CBD lotion and olive oil and stuff like that to, whatever their particular method of ingestion is. But I can tell you it's funny because the batches of lotion that I used isolate for versus the batches that I used the full spectrum oil for, they told me it was night and day in the relief they received for their arthritis or their Crohn's disease or whatever it was. Man. But and that's, I didn't tell them what the particular ingredients were, and they just told me that kind of empirical knowledge. So I do fully believe that.
That's tight.
Just because, like you said, everybody's putting in isolate or distillate because it's legally safer and they feel less likely to be, attacked by the federal government, because as long as it doesn't have THC in it, it's a lot easier to say it wasn't from cannabis. But with the new regulations about agricultural hemp, as long as the input products were derived from legally identified agricultural hemp, it shouldn't matter how much THC is in it, which is a crazy thought, but that's the way the law is written right now. So if I go out to an Oregon hemp field that's growing agricultural hemp under an agri license in the state, and I make a distillate from it, and it ends up with a 5% THC, I can put that into gummies and stuff and sell it as a CBD hemp product, and there should be no beef with the states and the federal government.
That's tight. Yeah, because that's the thing I've been reading about raids too, is that they're saying that the THC content was too high on their crop, and so that's why.
So as long as you grew it and you got it tested and you have a certificate from somebody like us that says that you met the state's requirement for growing agricultural hemp,
Yeah.
in theory, there should be no limits to the THC. It shouldn't even be a consideration because of the way the law is written. So I know what you're saying. The law right now is 0.3% THC content by mass.
Yeah.
And if it's more than that, it's considered cannabis. If it's less than that, it's considered hemp. But, as long as it's less than that and it's hemp, whatever you make from it, shouldn't matter how much THC is in there. Which again, I only mention it is because I've seen in Arizona at Head West in Tucson, people selling CBD flower for smoking, and it probably has a 0.3% THC in it, but it might have 2% THCA in it. So you're still gonna get very high.
Yeah.
But they sell it in smoke shops, which I find very interesting. So I feel like it's going to get a little bit goofier before it gets better, but you might start seeing CBD products on the market that you get high from.
Yeah, some of the CBD guys on IG too, dude. Like their flower looks butter. I'm like, God damn, it's purple. It's fucking trichomes all over. I'm like,
oh yeah, we've seen some beautiful hemp. 18, 20% hemp. That looks just like CBD. It looks like just like cannabis. I will say too, just because I don't know if you guys have seen any of this coming out, but CBGA, which is like the precursor to all the other cannabinoids.
yeah,
Some people have started getting their hands on hemp that grows CBGA. So it doesn't produce very much THC or CBD. It only produces CBG. But that's a new thing that you're probably going to start seeing in the next year or two as it spreads out more and more.
That's dope, man.
Yeah.
So do you guys get many hemp farms testing with you?
Yeah, I would say right now we're in the end of it, but we're in the harvest season, as we say in the outdoor. Hemp harvest is still coming through, and it's about 30% of our business right now.
Damn.
So about there's tens of thousands of acres of hemp in Oregon right now, and there's a lot of it.
Yeah, because that's if I set up shop in Oregon again, that's probably what I want to do, just because it's all based on volume, man. And I can do that shit, especially outside. So
yeah, I think it's a safer market.
It doesn't have to be as pretty. Yeah, it doesn't have to be pretty for retail. You know what I mean? It's getting taken down with the fucking combine and turned into oil or something else.
Yep, and I think that you can make really good products with it. But I will mention that too is that I've also done a lot of research into CBD, and one of the things that's kind of undermentioned is the actual amount of CBD you have to ingest to actually have an effect. Because a lot of people take far less CBD than is necessary to even really have much of an effect on them.
10 milligrams ain't shit, man.
And, especially when that 10 milligrams, you might only absorb 2 of those milligrams into your body, and about 8 of them are going to go right through you. That seems to be about 10 to 20% seems to be about the oral availability for it.
Damn. Is there anybody making products other than like oil or distillate with their hemp farms? Like, is there anybody making fiber products or like wood products or anything?
We have. I haven't seen as much fiber. You see some fibrous material come through because when farms are processing, like you said, large scale combine oil processing, a large percentage of that is woody biomass material.
Yeah.
So we will see some of that come through. We have seen some people that are growing seeds because they're in the seed selling side of things.
Yeah.
Some people selling hemp seeds for $1 a seed is about average price right now.
Damn, that's tight. I seen Heroes of the Farm. They had like some kind of autoflower Harley
Oh,
suit cross. Yeah, so I was
yeah.
like, damn, that shit looks tight. And it was
Um,
like a big ass bag with their sticker on it.
yeah, Harley Sue is a big CBD hemp flower that we see a lot of. We work with one of the big farms out here is the Iverson Family Farms, and
Okay,
they work with Charlotte's Web out of Denver. So Charlotte's Web does get a lot of their hemp from Oregon.
word. So there's a company called Charlotte's Web.
Yeah, they're actually the ones that own the strain. Or
Oh, okay,
I think
yeah. I
there's some
remember I ran
affiliation
that
with it.
outside.
Yeah,
That shit was bomb. I ran it outside a couple years.
it's a good one. They're supposedly the founder of it or whatever is the one who came up with that genetics, and they're one of the biggest CBD producers in Colorado.
That's tight, man. Shout out to
Yeah,
Charlotte's Web, man.
yeah.
Because Dynasty Genetics too. They took that
Oh,
Oregon Huckleberry. It's like Charlotte Huckleberry Web, and dude,
oh,
it
yep,
fucking tastes
yeah.
bomb, dude. It's like 4% THC and then like 11% CBD or something.
That's so funny.
Yeah, let's also I don't think they have anything to do with it. It's like I also don't want to make sure we're thanking people like the Stanley brothers who, they develop CBD strains and then they push for CBD only
Yeah,
legislation in like states that are going, rec so that they can take over the market.
I feel you. There's so much dirty stuff going on right now, especially the companies that are trying to own the genetics. Phylos is a company out here that when they
Yeah,
first started, they were awesome what they were doing, trying to map out the genetic genome, globally of all cannabis. And then it turns out the whole time they're just backdoor saving everybody's genetics so that they could take it for their own and claim it as their own.
Yep.
yeah,
Yep.
yeah, yeah. We tried to
Phylos.
ask them to come on. We tried to ask them to come on the show, but they didn't want to. They didn't want to
Ah,
listen to us ask them questions and shit.
Yeah, they're
that's so
fuckers.
funny. Yeah, I mean, I'll talk. For better or worse, I'll pretty much honestly answer any question you guys have about any of those big companies and stuff too. If I know about them, because I I think that the biggest problem with CBD being unregulated is the amount of injury that we're unknowingly giving to patients because of the pesticides and the solvents. And
Yeah,
I can promise you that many of the very large, big companies that claim to be safe and care about the people are the biggest people that are perpetrating the worst type of things.
yeah. So like I remember companies saying that, but like they could take your shitty dark slabs and turn it into distillate, and even if it was dirty, they could cook the pesticides out of it too. Is
Yeah.
there any truth in that? And like, how is there a certain temperature that they have to reach for a certain amount of time or something? Like,
So I'll say yes and no. There are a lot of ways that you can remediate pesticides from
yeah,
concentrates and stuff like that. But I'll also say that there's a difference between removal and remediation and just breaking them down into something that we can't identify. Because a lot of times,
uh,
pesticides have a very short half life, a day, a week, a month, something like that. And then they break down, and instead of one molecule, you have two halves of a molecule. Now, the unfortunate thing is those two halves might cause cancer just as much as the full one did, but we can't test
damn,
for those halves. We can only test for the full
uh,
thing. So I'll
fuck,
also say that a lot of people just
Uh,
break them down, and a lot of people don't actually remove them. So
damn,
those are you should recognize those as two very different processes. But to answer your question, yes, I don't know if that's what most people do or not. I know of a few ways that you can do it, but um, generally the quality of your material, like for example, if I remediate pesticides from a distillate, it's more difficult than remediating from a live resin
uh,
because one's acidic and the other one's decarboxylated.
Yeah.
So things like that matter too. You almost have to treat it on a case-by-case basis. But the best rule of thumb is just don't put them in. You don't got to take them out.
Yeah, dude, serious. And guys don't like that question, like gardening guys. Like, man, so what did you spray on this shit? What do you mean?
Yeah.
I'm like,
Yeah.
I'm like, simple question, dude. What did you spray on it? Like
and if I
in
could,
veg, in flour, or anything. It doesn't really, like, I don't care. Like, tell me.
and some of them are systemic, so they stay with the plant for the whole life, and it gets taken up
Yeah.
into the tissue.
Fucking Eagle 20, bro. Eagle 20 in Seattle, bro. I swear everybody was using that shit. Because it was like a bunch of Cali folks. And
Yeah.
Cali folks got game, man. Like that shit would kill mold and bugs. And you wouldn't have no fucking issues. But fuck, it's bad for you. And it was systemic. We'd spray it in veg, but that shit's in there all the way to the end, man. It
We
doesn't.
still see that once in a while.
Yeah, dude.
The other, let's see, what was I gonna say? But there's so many natural pesticides that are completely legit. Like some people use tobacco juice. It seems to work very well for some of our clients, and they don't have any problems. And we even added a test for nicotine to see if we could find it on the cannabis label, and we couldn't find it.
Damn, that's tight. Cause that's
Yeah.
man, I like to smoke blunts, and that's I
Yeah.
remember asking Will. I remember asking Will about that. I'm like, what if I dipped a dab in some fucking nicotine e-juice? Like, wouldn't the
Yeah.
effects be similar? And would it be safe? You know what I mean? Is it okay to fucking throw that shit in the banger with my dab? And is it gonna
Yeah.
kill me? You know what I mean? I'm like,
I mean, as safe as e-juice gets.
yeah,
I was gonna say too, and I hate to say it because my girlfriend uses a Juul, but and I hit that thing too, but I really shouldn't. I would advise people to move away from any kind of e-cigarette juice, and it's just because those very safe additives that they use, the polyethylene glycol, propylene glycol, ethylene glycol, glycerin, whatever it is, those things turn into formaldehyde and benzene and these other compounds. And I don't like saying it because I wish it wasn't true, but
yeah,
unfortunately, it's just science,
it's
and I can't
time.
escape it.
Yeah,
And like I said, I took my somebody who had a sub-ohm e-juice thing, and we turned it over and put it into one of our headspace samplers, and we ran it. We cranked the electricity up or whatever, the output. And, sure enough, we had like 20 or 30 compounds that all had library matches for very similar compounds to some aldehydes, formalin,
damn.
and those are fixitants. So it actually will preserve your lungs like a piece of tissue in formaldehyde.
Wow,
And
that's not good.
basically the problem
Yeah.
is the thing that we're doing to ourselves when we do this over and over again is you basically, like some of the things, is basically kind of build up scar tissue, and it affects your ability for your lower lung or your alveoli to uptake oxygen. So another observation that all these patients had was their oxygen saturation, which is that thing they put on your finger when you go into the doctor's office, and it tells you basically how well your body's absorbing oxygen when you're breathing. Their oxygen sats were down. Like it should be at 98, 99% at all times, and theirs were anywhere between 65 to 92. And that's really low, so they're constantly struggling for air, and that's
and these were people that are using like Juul, like tobacco, right? Like e-cigarettes.
And again, about 44% of these people were both using nicotine products and cannabis vaporizer products. So it's really hard to say which one was the biggest contributing factor, but from what I can tell, more people smoked cannabis products than, both or only cannabis than the people that smoked both or only nicotine. So
Yeah, it was
it
like
seems
40% were cannabis or something like that.
Yeah, it really seems to be, like you said, the honey bucket or honey cut, whatever that stuff was, really screwed people up. And vitamin E, mineral oil, squalene, vegetable oil, MCT oil. Don't put MCT oil in your carts. That's basically like coconut oil.
And I have to. Go ahead. Sorry, finish off.
No, please go ahead. I was done.
No, I was just saying, is this like strictly for like vaping, or are you finding that this is the case with like people who dab a lot, like cannabis, or is this just?
I can't comment so much on that. I'm speaking
Okay.
more specifically to cartridges.
Gotcha.
And so yeah, and pre-pack cartridges at that. Not even like if you fill your own dab carts, you know what you put in there. But
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, because one of my homies, he has one of those little stinger pens that's not a car. It's just got a little heating element, I think it's made out of porcelain or something, and he changes it out like every week or so. And that's what he'd say too. Is like, man, this shit's way safer. You know what I mean? Like, I can buy.
You know what you're putting in. One thing I wish I could have answered for you tonight. I tried to get it done, but it'll have to be for another podcast perhaps. But we got a new instrument in that lets us quantify metals. Heavy metal testing is kind of a big new thing in the hemp game.
Yeah,
and,
dude, I saw.
I was just about to say something about that.
Yeah, I saw posts about that too.
Metal fume fever, and like the soldering. People thinking like the soldering of the forging of the metals, like when creating the cartridges, to be something that could potentially off gas when heated. I don't know anything about that, so
and that's what I'm trying to figure out too, because it's very non-specific. But what I did is we just got our it's called an ICP-MS that you do those testing on, and we just got ours up and working in the last week. So I haven't prepared these samples for it yet. But basically, I did is I took a cartridge and I broke it down into its separate components, like the gaskets or the O-rings, the glass body. The metal tube, and the filament in particular is what I'm interested in, because if we find these heavy metals in the filament material, that's what you're talking about, is you heat that thing up and you're going to off-gas heavy metal particulates and things like that, which will be very detrimental to your lungs if that's what you're breathing in.
Totally, but I do remember them saying, like, at least like initial studies, and I don't know, like I don't have a source for this, but saying like that like less than like 0.01% of cartridges failed initial like like metal toxicity test or whatever the test was.
And I really wish I could speak more to it, because I know it's going to be a hot topic here soon. So, follow back up with me, and I hope within a couple months of just collecting data, I'll have much more more information to pass along. But we did run 2 samples, and I can't even say if this is a lot or a little. I think it would be technically over the suggested testing limits, but we found about 800 parts per billion, or about 1 part per million, of lead, and we test for lead, cadmium, arsenic, and one other one I'm blanking on. But I think it was lead and cadmium we found in about 1 part per million, which I think is going to be above the action limit. So we would fail that hemp. But again, I don't know, because it is that bad in the grand scheme of things. I don't know if concentrates will or if extracts will concentrate this heavy metal material or not. There's a lot of unknowns there.
Is that because hemp remediates the soil so well?
Absolutely.
Is it just pulling that shit out of the dirt? That's why? So like anything that's bad in the soil is, damn, that's crazy.
But to be honest, I'm going to also test liquid nutrients, because I just don't know. Maybe there's a bunch of liquid nutrients, and people that hydro or whatever will run into similar issues. I just can't say at this time.
Yeah, because I remember, certain bottles of newts, and then even my soil amendments I would buy from the farm store. Like it would say that there are heavy metals in this shit, And so, fuck, that might be
The
like,
question is how much?
yeah, dude, damn. So that might be a downside to my whole organic shit, man. Like, no till
Yeah,
might be the only way. You know what I mean? Don't
yeah.
amend nothing. Just throw some fucking shit on there and some
And,
compost.
and one interesting observation that we noticed, and it's been hard for us to gather this information because this is really our second year of testing hemp, but it does seem to be that if you grow hemp on the same field 2 years in a row, the second harvest will be far less significant in size and yield because it drinks up all the nutrients and stuff out of the soil very quickly, it seems.
Well, like, would the second crop test lower in heavy metals and shit?
I would assume it would too. I believe it would just be, testing lower and everything. But yeah, the same farm with, grew one specific genetics. They grew, 2 acres of it last year, and then this year they grew 4 acres. They regrew it on 2 of the acres they grew last year and 2 new acres. Same strain all the way across the board, and they have almost twice the yield on the new field as they did on the field that they grew on last year. Just
Damn,
the yield. I don't know
that's
about the
wild,
specific
bro.
potency, but
That's wild.
yeah,
So
these
that,
people
like,
might
man,
have
that's
to rotate their fields.
compost.
Yeah, like
Yeah, and add compost to each row. It's like get a truck to do a line. You know what I
yeah, or
mean?
you
And,
might
and plant in that.
you might have to bring back in soil to refortify it or grow nitrogen fixing plants in the off season or something.
Yeah, damn, that's dope, man. Good info, Paul. Fuck, man. Like,
Yeah, because you're not really gonna know that until you've grown a few seasons, and by then it's like, oh shit, it's too
yeah,
late now.
no
So
doubt.
things to understand because a lot of people don't test their soil for NPK or nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium, but
Yeah,
that would be
yeah,
something you'd want to track year after year to figure out if you can continue to maintain yields.
no doubt, man. Damn, that gives me a lot of shit to think about now, man. Like, fuck,
Yeah,
because like that's how I would choose my amendments was what the NPK content was. You know what I mean? I'm like,
right.
when I would put more like blood meal and nitrogen type shit in my tea during the veg phase, just because I felt like I would get more bacteria breaking those down in the solution that I would pour on the plant. So I'm like, in theory, this is working in my head, but it's like
Yeah.
there's a whole bunch of other shit I was not even thinking about now that I'm like, whoa. So like,
the the
dude,
pH of the solution, I think, when you're feeding them is very important. And on a previous farm I worked
yeah,
at, they didn't always take care to pH down their solution. And
yeah.
I feel like a lot of times it killed our plants or
Yeah, yeah, I've made tea too hot in bloom for sure with fucking vape guano, dude. Like it was,
yeah,
I
that's
went
tough.
overboard for the first couple weeks, and then it was like, okay, don't use so much, just use a little bit. Okay, cool.
Yeah, it's hard to dial it in.
Yeah, yeah, it took a minute.
Different times a year too. Another observation we've noticed is a lot of people's potency numbers go down in the summertime.
When they
Um,
light dep or something, like if they light dep and pull down in temp.
even indoor growers, because it seems that inevitably the plants will be heat stressed
Yeah,
relative to the winter time, and that affects their potency numbers, and the numbers go down, and they always blame us like it's our fault in the lab, like we must have some
yeah,
systemic problem or we're just giving everyone lower potency numbers or something. But in reality, I think that's just, again, another kind of macro observation of what's going on to a lot of farms.
yeah, dude. When I was at Kings of Canna, I can't remember the name of the farm, but they had this critical mass pheno that was 15 and 15. 15% CBD, 15% THC, and it was like
Yeah.
every time they
Jeez.
brought it in, and then it's like they brought one in the summer, and it was like 12 and 13, and it was fucking hellish stringy, and I was just like, man, what the fuck? And they're like,
Yeah.
well, I'm like, this don't look like the last batch, and they're like, well, I'm like, did you guys not turn your AC on when it got fucking hot that last week? Because there was like 3 days of 90 degrees in Portland, and they
Yep.
just
Yeah.
they just looked at me like, how the fuck do you know that? I'm like, it just looks like it fucking got hot, bro. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
You could see
and
it.
yeah, like it looked the flower just looked like it was stressed the fuck out, and the yield was lower, but the lab result was too. It was
And
a
it's
couple
so
of
hard for us to convince a grower that it's them and not us.
yeah, nobody wants to hear that shit. They're like,
Fuck.
fuck you,
Yeah, I'm
man.
sorry,
We were
but it's
dialed,
you.
bro.
It's
This
not
shit was
God.
dialed in.
Fucking.
Yeah, I wish I had $1 for every time I had a fight with a grower or processor to try to explain to them, 52 different directions that our science is legit and it's really just low numbers. Like I've had people that have, threatened to fight me almost because of
Jesus.
I'm telling them a result. Like this one business owner asked me if I was ready to lose my job over that result I just gave him.
Jesus Christ.
And I was like,
Wow.
man, because
Jeez.
he felt like his rapport with the owner would,
Yeah.
and he told me, he goes, I'm going to another lab, and if I find out that you're wrong, I'm suing you. And I happily told him that I wish him well, and I said, well, I look forward to seeing those other results.
Yeah.
And the funniest part is the other lab, the results came back even lower than ours were.
Damn.
So, he had to eat his words, but it's
Yeah.
it happens a lot.
Proof is in the pudding, man.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
science is the ultimate, arbiter.
No doubt. Shit, dude. So we're pretty close to an hour now. Like, is there anything else you want to talk about? The cartridge stuff, dude. Like, is there like any can you elaborate more on it's like the cutting agents that go in are labeled safe on their containers that you purchase them in, but once you heat them up, like they turn into shit that is not good for you.
Yeah, absolutely. And you can see it too if you want to get bored and kind of look at some of the molecules. You can see just how similar they are. For example, one of the solvents that we use here is called acetonitrile, and it's a semipolar solvent, but if you were to heat it up very hot, it'll actually turn into cyanide.
Damn.
So,
That's not fucking good to inhale, man.
We work with it. We always have gloves on. Technically, everything has an action limit and a personal exposure limit. Excuse me. You can touch it, you can drink it even, but if you heat it up, all of a sudden it becomes something that's very, very deadly. And it's the same thing. So I would just ask people to, if you don't believe it, grab a science book or, put your trust into a scientist when they tell you that the thermal decomposition of these safe, common additives and molecules. I'm not arguing that polyethylene glycol and propylene glycol and glycerin aren't safe. You can drink them, you can eat them, you can rub them all over your body. But if you heat them up under a coil with a very high current, you will thermally oxidize and decompose these products.
Yeah, thermal decomposition. That's a dope fucking phrase, man.
I'll even say too that terpenes, and I hate to say this, but I need to do a little bit more research into it. I found some articles that just talk about even the oxidation product of terpenes can cause respiratory ailments and things like that. So I think that the name of the game is stay away from any kind of additive. The more pure cannabinoid, the concentrate you're dabbing or smoking is, the better for you.
Yeah, just do dabs, kids. Just do dabs.
Yeah.
No cards. Cards are cut.
Yeah,
I don't know of any cartridges who don't use some sort of cutting agent.
Do the bubble test. I always do the bubble test. If you turn the cartridge upside down and you see the bubble of air move through, don't smoke it.
Word.
Well, define cutting agent though. Just anything cut with a cart. Like what's a cutting agent?
So to me, anything besides a cannabinoid or a terpene is a cutting agent.
Okay,
And
so what
I'll
about
qualify
this?
that even further. A terpene that was derived from cannabinoid, from cannabis.
Okay, so what like Echo Electuary does a lot of like half and half, like live resin and distillate carts. Would you consider that?
As
One of
long as
those?
all that's going into was live resin that was properly processed so that there's no more extraction solvent in it.
Yep.
Live resins tend to have a little bit more butane and stuff in them because people have a harder time taking it out of it. But yeah, assuming there's no other solvents, that's totally fine because the live resin came right from the plant. There wasn't any additives. And that distillate, as long as that distillate didn't have anything to put back into it after the fact, yeah, totally cool with that. And that, yeah, so those both came from cannabinoids or derived from cannabis.
Shout out to Echo Electuary. Regis, if you're listening, please come on our show and let us interview you, dude. We're a fan of your work, man.
Well, thank you guys for letting me harp on the topic.
Oh yeah, no doubt, man. Shit, is there anything else you wanna say, man, before you go? Like, Will, do you have any questions? We got 4 more minutes at least, dude. We try to roll for an hour at least.
Yeah, like any off-the-wall questions? Doesn't have to be about this.
Not at the moment. I might think of one in a bit.
Yeah, I was gonna say earlier, you guys were going off, so I didn't want to interrupt. I've seen posts about heavy metal tests on hemp crops, and it's cannabis guys who are. It's like funny meme type shit. You know what I mean? And I didn't. I guess I didn't really understand the humor so much until I talked to you tonight. You know what I mean? Because it is something that is a thing. You know what I mean? And because I've read mad articles too that say hemp, remediates the soil and pulls out any toxins and shit that you may have had in there, including like radioactive isotopes and shit. I've read articles about that. I'm like, damn, that's crazy.
And it's not just the heavy metals either. And I'll just comment on this real quick. But in my past life, I did some work with nanoparticles and the safety surrounding handling nanomaterials. And basically, nanomaterials is anything that is very, very tiny within a certain definition. I think it's less than 10 nanometers in one dimension. So it could be really long, but as long as that one dimension is less than 10 nanometers, it's considered a nanomaterial. And I think that's the issue with heavy metals is that we breathe them into us, because it's like one metal ion or one metal particle. It's essentially a nanomaterial. And those are very, very bad just because of the size class, the particular class that they're in. We think asbestos like difficulties, and that's really the issue is that your body tries to process them and get them out, and when it can't, it essentially just becomes scar tissue, and you end up with horrible respiratory issues. So I think that's why now that I'm remembering, heavy metals are bad.
Word.
But thank you guys again.
Yeah, no doubt. Thanks
I'll
for
keep
coming on the
show.
No, dude, like that. It makes sense. Like maybe people will want to grow indoors for cannabis, and maybe for CBD oil type shit if it's gonna pull bad shit out of the soil, or you're gonna lose your yield on the second fucking crop on the same acreage. Like that's.
Yep, and remember too that China and Uruguay and all these other countries are going to start producing thousands and thousands of acres or hectaacres of hemp soon. Or are already doing it. So when their product hits the market, we're going to see the prices of CBD drop even further to the point that it might.
Yeah. Maybe safety. Like I like when companies sell themselves on the safety of their products and being transparent in their processes and shit. So maybe all that China, Russia CBD will be fucking laced with all kinds of bad shit. We can be like, well,
we'll wait and see. We'll wait and see.
Yeah, some radioactive Chernobyl fucking hemp. You know what I mean? Like
heavy metals testing will be important.
Yeah, no doubt. Well, shit, dude.
Thank you guys.
Thanks for coming on the show, Paul. We really appreciate it. You shared a lot of good info, dude. Eye-opening for me. I have a lot of shit to think about as far as farming in the future. So
Any questions, send me an email or something. I'm happy to answer anytime.
Yeah, no doubt. And anytime you want to come back too, dude, hit us up, man. Like
You'll hear from me again.
you're on the cutting edge, bro. You got game. So we
Thank
love
you guys.
like you, man. It's been an honor. We'll send you the link when we got it for Spotify and YouTube. So
Awesome. Thank you so much.
yeah, have a good night. I'm gonna
You
go ahead
too.
and do my outro
Yeah,
dance,
man.
ladies and gentlemen. This was the 27th episode of Concerned Dabs podcast. I was your host, KDM Kane. With me was my co-host, Will Terps. We had Paul Swift
Later,
of Swift
y'all.
Solutions talking about the vape crisis of 2019. I got to give a shout out to my guys in production, Mitchell Wilson and Jesse Curry. This has been a Main Node and Joseph Street Enterprise production.